This is a story about a black single father from Queens who walked into a world that was never built for someone like him, and changed everything anyway. In America, they tell you that hard work is all you need. But nobody warns you that sometimes, no matter how hard you work, the color of your skin is still the first thing people see when you walk through the door. Victoria Sterling had everything a media empire worth billions could buy. A Skyview penthouse overlooking Millennium Park, access to the best specialists money could buy, and a name that opened every door in Chicago. But none of it, not $1, not one degree, not one expert, could help her reach her own daughter. For years, 7-year-old Emma had lived behind a wall that no one could break through. Until a black single father working as a caterer did something no expert had ever tried. And before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We share stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. You do not want to miss a single one. Now let us get into this story. That morning, Marcus Hayes woke before his alarm. The radiator in his Queens apartment clanked against the winter cold, and somewhere outside, a car horn blared. He lay still, counting the cracks in the ceiling the way he did every morning since Michelle died 3 years ago. A soft thud came from the next room. Ethan was awake. Marcus found his son sitting on the edge of the bed, hands clamped over his ears, body rocking in a tight rhythm. The garbage truck outside was grinding through its morning route. To Ethan, those sounds hit like physical blows. Marcus knelt in front of him and held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. When he reached 0, he pressed his palm gently against Ethan's chest. Steady pressure, no words. This was how they spoke to each other when the world became too loud. 12 minutes later, Ethan lowered his hands. His brown eyes found his father's face, and something close to a smile crossed his lips. Getting dressed was a careful ritual. Marcus chose shirts without tags, socks without seams, pants with soft elastic waistbands. Breakfast was plain oatmeal at room temperature, served in the blue bowl because the red one made Ethan cry for reasons neither of them could fully explain. These details were not preferences. They were survival. Marcus was washing the dishes when his phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. Dorothy filed, court date in 3 weeks, call me. His hands went still in the soapy water. Margaret Collins was Michelle's mother. 6 months ago, she had looked Marcus in the eye and told him she was suing for custody of Ethan. She believed he could not provide what her grandson needed. Not enough money, not enough time, not enough of whatever it was she thought a child like Ethan required. And Marcus knew, though she never said it out loud, that part of her doubt had nothing to do with his finances or his schedule. Part of it was simply who he was. A black man raising a child with special needs alone, in a world that had already decided what that looked like before he even opened his mouth. Marcus looked at his son, who was arranging his oatmeal into a perfect spiral before taking the first bite. Everything he did now would be examined, questioned, used against him in a courtroom. Every choice he made for Ethan could be twisted into evidence of his failure. He could not think about that now. He had a shift to work, and Crown Elite Catering did not care about custody battles. He dropped Ethan at Lincoln Development Academy, kissed the top of his head, and took the train into downtown Chicago. Victoria Sterling stood at the windows of her Skyview penthouse, watching the city wake up 53 floors below. Her reflection stared back at her, tailored suit, perfect posture, the face that Fortune magazine had once called unreadable. She had built Sterling Global Media from a single local news station into a $15 billion empire. She had survived a divorce, a hostile takeover attempt, and a board that questioned every decision she made. None of it had prepared her for this morning. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Miss Sterling, Dr. Rebecca Miller is asking if you can join Emma's session." Victoria checked her schedule. She had 10 minutes before her next call. "I'm coming." The sensory room had cost $220,000 to design. Padded walls, adjustable lighting. Specialized equipment that was supposed to help Emma process the world without falling apart. Victoria watched through the observation window as her daughter sat in the corner, tracing the same pattern on the floor over and over, while the therapist spoke in a carefully modulated voice. Emma did not look up. She never looked up anymore. Victoria entered the room and knelt at the prescribed distance. The rules said she could not touch Emma unless Emma initiated contact. The rules said she had to wait, to be patient, to let her daughter come to her. Victoria had never been good at waiting. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly. Emma's fingers kept moving. Trace, 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 the same pattern, the same silence. Victoria's phone buzzed in her pocket. The conference call was starting. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked toward the door. She was almost through it when her brother appeared. Daniel Sterling was 2 years younger and had spent his entire career in her shadow. As vice president of Sterling Global Media, he handled the details she did not have time for. He was good at details, sometimes too good. "The gala tonight," he said, matching her stride. "We need Emma there." "No. The board is asking questions, Victoria. The canceled appearances, the rumors about Emma's condition. They are wondering if you can manage your own family." Victoria stopped walking. She turned to face him, her expression flat. "Are they wondering? Or are you helping them wonder?" Daniel's smile did not waver. "I am trying to protect you. One appearance, one photo of you and Emma looking happy together. That is all it takes to make this go away." She studied him for a long moment. Daniel had always wanted her position. He had been patient about it, building alliances, planting seeds of doubt, waiting for her to stumble. She had always known this. She just had not expected him to use her daughter as the tool. But she was tired of fighting the board, the press, the endless stream of specialists who could not tell her why her daughter was slipping further away every single day. "Fine," she said. "But I control the environment. Limited press, soft lighting, 20 minutes maximum." Daniel was already typing on his tablet. "I will handle everything. Before we go on, I want to ask you something. Drop your answer in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where someone judged your ability to care for someone you love, based on something you could not control? Your income, your skin color, your background. Tell me your story. I read every single comment and your words matter here. Now back to the story. The Sterling Hope Foundation Gala was the kind of event Marcus only ever saw in photographs. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, women wearing jewelry that cost more than his entire apartment building. His job was to set up service stations, stay out of sight, and avoid making eye contact with anyone important. Crown Elite Catering had been very clear about that last rule. He was arranging champagne glasses in a service corridor when the screaming started. At first, he thought someone was hurt. An accident, maybe, or a medical emergency. But as the sound continued, rising and falling in jagged waves, something in his chest tightened with recognition. He knew that frequency of distress. He had heard it from Ethan 100 times. He pushed through the service door into the ballroom. A small girl in a white dress was on the floor near the stage, thrashing against the marble. A woman in medical scrubs was trying to hold her arms down. Security guards were shouting at the crowd to step back. And in the center of it all, frozen under the blazing lights, stood Victoria Sterling. Marcus watched as another specialist approached, speaking loudly and firmly, trying to cut through the girl's panic. But every word, every touch, every flashing camera was making it worse. The girl's nervous system was drowning in input, and everyone who was trying to help was pushing her deeper under. Security was moving through the crowd now, clearing a perimeter. One of them spotted Marcus in his catering uniform and started toward him. Marcus was already walking. He did not run. Running would add to the chaos. He moved steadily toward the girl, ignoring the guard's commands, ignoring the gasps from the crowd, ignoring everything except the small figure on the cold marble floor. 10 feet away, he sat down. Cross-legged, back slightly turned, making himself small and unthreatening, just a presence at the edge of her storm. He began to count, low and steady, the same tone he used with Ethan. 10-9-8-7. The screaming continued, but something shifted, a hesitation between one shriek and the next. 6-5-4, no urgency in his voice, no fear, just numbers falling like rain. 3-2-1, silence. Marcus extended his hand, palm up, and waited. He did not look at the girl, he did not move. He just breathed and let the quiet settle around them. 10 seconds passed, 20. The ballroom held its breath, then small fingers closed around his. Marcus turned slowly. The girl was staring at him with red-rimmed eyes, her chest still heaving, but the panic had drained from her face. In its place was something that looked almost like wonder. Like she had finally found someone who spoke her language. Footsteps approached behind him. Security guards, ready to drag him away from the billionaire's daughter. "Stop!" The voice was cold and commanding. Victoria Sterling walked forward, her heels clicking against the marble. She looked at Marcus, then at her daughter's hand wrapped around his. Then at the calm that had settled over Emma's face for the first time in months. "What is your name?" "Marcus Hayes, ma'am." Victoria's gaze moved to her brother, who was watching from the edge of the crowd with an expression Marcus could not read, then back to Marcus. "My office. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. She turned to Daniel. "Clear the room, the gala is over." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded and began directing security. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus stayed where he was, Emma's small hand still gripping his. For the first time that night, the girl smiled. Marcus arrived at Sterling Tower at 8:45 the next morning. The building rose 62 stories into the Chicago sky, all glass and steel, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from owning half a city's media landscape. He had put on his only suit, the one he had worn to Michelle's funeral. He stood in the lobby feeling like a trespasser. The receptionist looked at him the way people always looked at him in places like this. Polite suspicion. Professional distance. The kind of look that says, "Are you sure you belong here?" She made a phone call, checked his name twice, and finally handed him a visitor badge. 53rd floor, Ms. Sterling's assistant will meet you. The elevator was mirrored on all sides. Marcus watched his reflection multiply into infinity and tried not to think about how out of place he looked. Victoria's assistant led him through a maze of glass-walled offices where people in expensive clothes pretended not to stare. At the end of the hallway, a set of double doors opened into an office the size of his entire apartment. Victoria Sterling stood by the windows, silhouetted against the morning sun. She did not turn around when he entered. "Close the door." Marcus did. He waited. "I had my team research you last night," Victoria said, still facing the windows. Marcus Hayes. 39 years old. Widowed 3 years ago. One son, age 7, enrolled at Lincoln Development Academy, a specialized program for children with sensory processing disorders. Currently employed by Crown Elite Catering at $14.75 an hour. She turned to face him. "You are also being sued for custody by your mother-in-law. Court date in 3 weeks. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "You have been thorough." "I am always thorough." Victoria walked to her desk and sat down. "What you did last night with my daughter, where did you learn that?" "I did not learn it anywhere. I just know what it is like to have a kid who feels too much. The specialists I have hired have degrees from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and Stanford. They have published papers. They have won awards." Victoria's voice was flat, controlled. "None of them have ever been able to do what you did in 30 seconds. Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Victoria studied him for a long moment. Then she opened a folder on her desk. "I am prepared to offer you a position as Emma's personal care assistant. The salary would be 10 times what you are currently making. Full benefits, flexible hours. You would have access to resources most people cannot imagine." Marcus thought about his empty bank account. He thought about the lawyer's fees piling up, the court date looming, Margaret's accusations that he could not provide for Ethan. This offer could solve everything. "No," he said. Victoria's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "No, I cannot take care of your daughter and mine at the same time. And if I spend all my time here, that is exactly what Margaret will use against me in court." He shook his head. "I am sorry. I cannot." For the first time since he had entered the room, something shifted in Victoria's expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "What if you did not have to choose?" she said. Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "Emma has never connected with anyone the way she connected with you last night. I do not know why, and frankly, I do not care why. I just know that I need whatever it is you have." Victoria leaned forward. "Bring Ethan with you. Let him spend time with Emma. I will provide tutors, therapists, whatever he needs, and I will give you access to my legal team for your custody case." It was more than generous. It was almost suspicious. Marcus had learned a long time ago that people like Victoria Sterling did not give anything away for free. "Why would you do that?" he asked. Victoria's mask slipped just for a second. Underneath it, Marcus saw something that looked like exhaustion, like desperation. "Because I have tried everything else," she said quietly, and nothing has worked. I have to stop here and ask you this. In the comments below, tell me, what would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have said yes to Victoria's first offer? Or would you have done what he did and put your child first even if it cost you everything? Write your answer below. I genuinely want to know. All right, let us keep going. The first week was strange for everyone. Marcus brought Ethan to the Sterling penthouse every morning, navigating a world of marble floors and priceless artwork that made both of them nervous. Emma's team of specialists watched him with barely concealed skepticism. The nannies whispered to each other when they thought he could not hear. Daniel Sterling stopped by twice, asking pointed questions about Marcus's qualifications and methodology that felt more like interrogations than conversations. Some of those looks were professional doubt. But Marcus had lived long enough to know the difference between someone questioning your methods and someone questioning your right to be in the room at all. But none of that mattered when Marcus watched Ethan and Emma together. The two children did not interact at first. They existed in parallel, occupying the same space without acknowledging each other. Ethan sat in one corner of the Serenity Therapy suite, arranging blocks in precise patterns. Emma sat in another corner, tracing her endless shapes on the floor. They did not speak. They did not look at each other, and yet something was happening between them. Marcus could feel it, a kind of silent communication that did not require words. On the fourth day, Emma stood up and walked across the room. She stopped in front of Ethan and held out her hand. In her palm was a small gray stone, smooth and round, the kind you might find at the bottom of a riverbed. Ethan looked at the stone. He looked at Emma. Then very slowly he reached out and took it. It was the first time Emma had voluntarily given anything to anyone in over a year. Victoria watched through the observation window, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Marcus stood beside her, saying nothing. "She has never done that before," Victoria said finally. "Not with the therapists, not with the nannies." "Not with me." Marcus understood what she was not saying. The rejection. The years of trying to reach a daughter who seemed to exist behind glass, visible but untouchable. "It is not about you," he said. "Ethan understands because he feels the same things she feels. The world is too loud for both of them, too bright." Too much, he watched the two children sitting together in comfortable silence. They do not have to explain themselves to each other. That is rare. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its sharpness. "How did you learn to help your son?" "Trial and error." "Lots of error." Marcus remembered those first months after Michelle died, when Ethan's meltdowns had been constant and he had felt like he was drowning. "I read books, watched videos, talked to other parents, but mostly I just paid attention. Ethan could not tell me what he needed, so I had to figure it out from watching him. I have hired people to watch Emma. Dozens of them. Watching is not the same as seeing." Marcus turned to face her. "Your specialists are looking for symptoms to diagnose and behaviors to correct. I am looking for a person who is trying to tell me something." Victoria's jaw tightened. For a moment, Marcus expected her to argue. Instead, she asked quietly, "What is Emma trying to tell me?" "I do not know yet. But I think if you stopped trying to fix her and started trying to understand her, you might find out." The changes came slowly at first. Marcus convinced Victoria to reduce Emma's therapy sessions from 6 hours a day to 3. He suggested removing half the equipment from the Serenity Therapy suite, creating more open space. He asked the staff to speak more quietly, move more slowly, dim the lights throughout the penthouse. Victoria resisted every change. She had spreadsheets and studies and expert opinions that contradicted everything Marcus suggested. But she also had a daughter who was starting to make eye contact again, who was sleeping through the night for the first time in months, who had begun to hum softly to herself while she played. 2 weeks into the arrangement, Emma spoke her first word in almost a year. Marcus was sitting with both children in the Serenity Therapy suite, building a tower of blocks that Ethan kept redesigning according to some internal blueprint only he could see. Emma was watching them, closer than usual, her body angled toward Ethan in a way that suggested interest rather than avoidance. Ethan placed a blue block on top of the tower. The structure wobbled. Emma reached out and steadied it with one finger. "Ethan," she said. The word was soft, almost a whisper, but Marcus heard it, and when he looked up, Emma was smiling. He found Victoria in her home office, staring at quarterly reports she was not actually reading. Emma said a word. Victoria's head snapped up. What? Ethan. She said his name. For a moment, Victoria's carefully constructed mask crumbled completely. Her eyes filled with tears, tears she blinked away before they could fall. She stood up so quickly her chair rolled back and hit the wall. I want to see her. They walked to the Serenity Therapy suite together. Through the observation window, they could see Emma and Ethan still building their tower, still existing in that shared space where neither of them had to be anything other than exactly who they were. She is in there, Marcus said quietly. She always has been, she just needed someone to wait for her. Victoria pressed her palm against the glass. I do not know how to wait, she admitted. I have spent my whole life making things happen, forcing outcomes, controlling variables. She shook her head. I do not know how to be the kind of mother she needs. So learn, Marcus watched her carefully. You taught yourself to run a company worth $15 billion. You can teach yourself this. Victoria turned to look at him. You make it sound simple. It is not simple, it is just necessary. That evening, Victoria called Marcus into her office. Her laptop was open, displaying legal documents. I spoke to my attorney about your custody case. She reviewed the filing. Margaret's argument is that you lack the financial resources and time to properly care for Ethan. Victoria closed the laptop. With your permission, I would like to provide you with legal representation, the best in the city. Marcus felt the familiar resistance rise in his chest. I do not need charity. It is not charity. It is compensation. Victoria met his gaze directly. You are doing something for my daughter that no amount of money could buy. The least I can do is make sure your son stays where he belongs. Marcus wanted to say no. He had been saying no to help for 3 years, convinced that accepting it meant admitting he could not do this alone. That it would prove every person wrong who had ever looked at him and assumed he needed saving. But he was tired of proving himself to a world that kept moving the finish line. You teach me to see Emma, Victoria said quietly. Let me help you keep Ethan. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay. Daniel Sterling watched his sister's transformation with growing alarm. For years, he had positioned himself as the steady hand behind Victoria's empire, the one who handled details while she chased headlines. He had cultivated relationships with board members, planted seeds of doubt about her leadership, and waited for the moment when her carefully constructed image would crack. Emma had been the key. A daughter Victoria could not control, could not fix, could not hide from public view. Every failed therapy session, every canceled appearance, every whispered rumor about the Sterling heiress's condition had weakened Victoria's position. Daniel had helped things along, quietly replacing competent specialists with ones he knew would fail, ensuring that Emma's struggles remained visible and constant. Now somehow a catering worker from Queens was undoing all of it. Daniel made some phone calls. He learned about Marcus's custody battle. He obtained Margaret Collins's contact information. And one afternoon, while Victoria was in meetings and Marcus was with the children, he picked up the phone. Mrs. Collins, this is Daniel Sterling. I believe we have some mutual interests to discuss. 3 weeks after Marcus began working with Emma, Daniel announced that Sterling Global Media would be hosting a special broadcast segment on childhood developmental disorders. The foundation would highlight its charitable work. Emma would make a brief appearance to demonstrate the company's commitment to families facing similar challenges. Victoria refused immediately. Absolutely not, she is not ready. The board is expecting this, Daniel said smoothly. We have already announced it to the press. Canceling now would raise exactly the kind of questions we have been trying to avoid. Marcus watched the exchange from across the room. Something about Daniel's insistence felt wrong, calculated in a way he could not quite identify. I do not like this, he said quietly to Victoria after Daniel left. Neither do I. But he is right about the board. Victoria rubbed her temples. If I back out now, they will use it as evidence that I cannot handle the pressure. Daniel has been building that narrative for months. Then let me be there. Let me stay close to Emma during the segment. Victoria nodded slowly. I will make sure you have access. The day of the broadcast, everything felt wrong from the moment they arrived. The segment was supposed to be filmed in Sterling Global Media's main studio, a controlled environment with soft lighting and limited personnel. But when Marcus arrived with Emma that morning, he found the location had been changed. They were now filming in a smaller studio on a different floor. One with harsh overhead lights and a crowd of technicians preparing equipment. There was a mix-up with scheduling, Daniel explained, appearing at Victoria's side. This was the only space available. Victoria's eyes narrowed. This was not what we agreed to. I am handling it. Daniel's smile was thin. Trust me. Marcus knelt beside Emma, who was already showing signs of distress. Her hands were clenching and unclenching. Her breathing had quickened. We need to get her out of here, he said to Victoria, but it was too late. The cameras were already rolling. Bright lights flooded the small space. A producer was counting down. Daniel had positioned himself near the security team, blocking the exit. Emma's first scream cut through the studio like a knife. Marcus moved toward her, but two security guards stepped into his path. Sir, you need to stay back. Get out of my way. She needs help. Sir, we are going to have to ask you to leave the set. Emma was on the floor now, thrashing against the hard concrete, surrounded by strangers who were doing everything wrong. Someone grabbed her arm. Someone else shouted for medical assistance. The cameras kept filming. Marcus watched helplessly as the girl he had spent weeks reaching fell apart in front of him. In the chaos, Emma broke free. She ran toward the exit, tripped over a cable, and fell hard against the edge of a metal equipment cart. Blood bloomed from a cut on her forehead. The cameras captured everything. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Margaret's lawyer filed an emergency motion that afternoon, citing the incident as evidence of Marcus's priorities. He was spending his time caring for a billionaire's child while his own son's needs went unmet. The video of Emma's meltdown was playing on every news channel. And somehow Margaret had obtained footage showing Marcus in the background, restrained by security, unable to help either child. The judge granted temporary custody to Margaret, pending a full hearing. Marcus had 48 hours to transfer Ethan to his grandmother's care. He stood in his apartment that night, watching Ethan sleep, and felt something inside him shatter. The next morning, Victoria called him to her office. Her face was pale, her usual composure cracked. The board is demanding I distance myself from you, she said. They are calling yesterday's incident a public relations disaster. Daniel is pushing for a vote of no confidence in my leadership. Marcus understood what she was saying. You are letting me go. I have to protect Emma. I have to protect the company. You are not protecting Emma. His voice was quiet. You are protecting yourself just like always. He walked out of her office without looking back. 2 days later, he put Ethan in Margaret's car and watched his son drive away. The boy pressed his palm against the window, his face confused and afraid. Marcus stood on the sidewalk until the car disappeared around the corner. Then he went back inside his empty apartment, sat down on his son's bed, and stared at the wall. I need to pause here for a moment, because this part of the story hits differently. Here is my question for you, and I want you to really think about this before you answer in the comments. Do you believe that Marcus was treated differently, not just because he was a catering worker, but because of who he was? Because of the color of his skin, because of what people assumed when they saw him walk into that room? Comment below with your honest answer. And if you know someone who has been through something like this, share this video with them. They need to hear this story. Now let us see what happens next. Emma stopped speaking the day after Marcus left. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping through the night. She stopped responding to the therapists, the nannies, the endless parade of specialists who tried to reach her. She sat in the corner of the Serenity Therapy suite for hours, clutching the small gray stone she had given to Ethan, staring at the door as if waiting for someone who would never come. Victoria watched her daughter retreat into silence and felt the full weight of what she had done. On the third day, she could not take it anymore. She dismissed the staff, locked herself in her home office, and began going through every document related to Emma's care over the past 2 years. Something Marcus had said kept echoing in her mind. The specialists she had hired, the ones who kept failing, the ones who made things worse instead of better. She pulled up employment records, cross-referenced termination dates, and tracked the hiring and firing patterns that had seemed random at the time. A picture began to emerge. The competent therapists had all been let go within weeks of starting, replaced by less experienced practitioners who followed rigid protocols that did not work for Emma. Every time Emma showed improvement, something disrupted it. The pattern led back to one person. Victoria called Daniel's assistant and requested access to his calendar and communications for the past 21 months. The assistant hesitated, citing privacy concerns. Victoria reminded her who owned the company. It took her 2 hours to find the text messages between Daniel and Margaret Collins. The conversations were careful, coded, but the meaning was clear. Daniel had been feeding Margaret information about Marcus since the beginning. He had provided her with footage from the failed broadcast. He had coached her on how to frame her custody arguments. He had orchestrated the change in filming location that caused Emma's meltdown. Her own brother had used her daughter as a weapon to destroy her. Victoria sat alone in her office as the sun set over Chicago. The choices that had led her here spread out before her like a map of her failures. The board meetings that mattered more than bedtime stories. The quarterly reports that took precedence over therapy sessions. The empire she had built at the cost of actually knowing her own child. She could bury this, confront Daniel privately, force him out quietly, protect the company's reputation. That was what the old Victoria would have done: control the narrative, minimize the damage. Keep the machine running. But then she looked at the security feed showing Emma in the Serenity Therapy suite, holding a stone and waiting for a friend who was not coming. She remembered Marcus, who had lost his son because he tried to help hers. All the years she had chosen power over connection, control over trust, came crashing down at once. Victoria picked up her phone and called Marcus. He almost did not answer. Marcus was lying on Ethan's bed, surrounded by his son's toys and books and the lingering smell of the laundry detergent they both used. He had been there for 3 days, leaving only to use the bathroom and drink water. He was not sure he would ever get up again. The phone rang 6 times before he finally reached for it. "I found something." Victoria's voice was different than he had ever heard it, stripped of its usual armor. "I need you to see it. I do not work for you anymore. This is not about work. It is about what really happened." She took a breath. "Daniel orchestrated everything, the location change, the security team that blocked you. He has been working with Margaret for months." Marcus sat up slowly. "What? I have the messages, I have proof." Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "I know you have no reason to trust me. I know I failed you when it mattered most, but I need your help to make this right." Marcus closed his eyes. Part of him wanted to hang up. To let Victoria Sterling clean up her own mess the way she always did. But another part of him remembered Ethan in Margaret's house, confused and scared and separated from the routines that kept him stable. He remembered Emma, alone and silent, clutching a stone. And he thought about every time in his life someone had told him his best was not good enough. Every door he had knocked on with his hands full and been turned away. Every room he had walked into where people had already made up their minds about him before he spoke a single word. He was tired of letting people write his story for him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following morning. Victoria had spent the night preparing her case. She had printouts of Daniel's communications with Margaret, timeline documentation showing how he had systematically undermined Emma's care. Records of the specialists he had secretly dismissed before they could make progress. She had enough evidence to end his career and potentially pursue criminal charges. Daniel arrived at the meeting looking confident, ready to push through his vote of no confidence. He had positioned himself as the steady alternative to his unstable sister, the one who could lead sterling global media without the distraction of personal problems. He did not notice the folder Victoria was holding until she slid it across the conference table. "Before we proceed with any votes," Victoria said, addressing the room, "I would like to share some information about my brother's activities over the past 21 months. Daniel's smile faltered as board members began passing the documents around the table. His face went pale as they reached the text messages with Margaret. By the time someone read aloud his instructions for changing the broadcast location, he was gripping the arms of his chair like a man watching his future collapse. "This is fabricated," he said. But his voice had lost its smoothness. "The communications came from your company phone," Victoria replied calmly. "The metadata is verifiable. The timestamps match the incidents in question. She looked at her brother with something that might have been pity. You used my daughter to try to take what you could not earn. You manipulated a custody case to destroy an innocent man. And you did it all because you could not stand being second. The board voted unanimously to remove Daniel from his position and launch an internal investigation. Security escorted him from the building 20 minutes later. He did not look at Victoria as he passed her. The custody hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table with Jennifer Brooks, the attorney Victoria had provided. She had won more family court cases than anyone in the state of Illinois. Across the aisle, Margaret Collins sat with her own lawyer. She looked smaller and older than Marcus remembered. Jennifer presented the evidence methodically, Daniel's manipulation. The coordinated effort to undermine Marcus's relationship with both children. The text messages showing how Margaret had been fed misleading information about Marcus's priorities and capabilities. When it was over, the judge looked at Margaret with something like sympathy. Mrs. Collins, I understand you believed you were acting in your grandson's best interests. But the evidence shows that you were manipulated by a third party with his own agenda. She turned to Marcus. Mr. Hayes, I am granting you full custody of Ethan, effective immediately. I am also issuing a finding that the original emergency motion was based on fraudulent representations. Marcus barely heard the rest of the ruling. All he could think about was Ethan. He was going to see his son again. Margaret approached him in the hallway after the hearing. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands shaking slightly. I thought I was protecting him, she said quietly. After Michelle died, I watched you struggling. I thought he needed more than you could give. Marcus wanted to be angry. He had every right to be angry. But looking at this woman who had lost her daughter and then watched her grandson slip away, he found he did not have the energy for rage. He needs his grandmother, too, Marcus said finally. That does not have to change. Margaret's face crumpled. She nodded once, unable to speak, and walked away. Marcus picked up Ethan that afternoon. His son was sitting on Margaret's porch when he arrived, a small suitcase beside him. When Ethan saw his father's car pull up, he stood slowly, his face uncertain, as if he was not sure this was really happening. Marcus knelt on the grass and opened his arms. Ethan walked into them and held on tight. I am sorry, Marcus whispered into his son's hair. I am so sorry I let you go. Ethan did not say anything. He just pressed his face against his father's chest and breathed. 1 week later, Victoria came to Queens. She had texted Marcus the day before asking if she could see him. Not at her office. Not at the penthouse, somewhere neutral. He had suggested the small park near his apartment, the one where he used to take Ethan to feed the pigeons. She was already there when he arrived, sitting on a bench near the swings. Emma was with her, holding the gray stone in both hands, scanning the playground with anxious eyes. Then Emma saw Ethan. Her whole body changed. The tension in her shoulders released. Something like light came into her face. She stood up and walked toward him, stopping a few feet away, waiting. Ethan looked at his father. Marcus nodded. The two children sat down together on the swings, not talking, not touching, just existing in the same space the way they had in the Serenity Therapy suite. Emma held out the stone. Ethan took it, examined it carefully, and handed it back. It was the most natural thing Marcus had ever seen. Victoria walked over to stand beside him. She looked different than she had in her office, smaller somehow, less certain. I resigned as CEO, she said. Marcus turned to look at her. Why? Because I realized I was trying to run an empire and learn how to be a mother at the same time, and I kept choosing wrong. She watched Emma swing gently back and forth. I do not know who I am if I am not running something. I have never had to figure that out before. That sounds terrifying, Marcus said. Victoria almost smiled. It is. She was quiet for a moment. I do not expect you to forgive me. I would not forgive me. I am working on it. Marcus watched the children together. You made a mistake, a big one, but you also fixed it when it counted. That does not undo the damage. No, she said softly, but it is a start. They stood in silence as the afternoon light softened around them. Sophie got off the swing and walked toward her mother. She did not speak, she just reached out her hand. Victoria looked down at her daughter's outstretched fingers. For a moment she did not move. Then slowly, she took Emma's hand and let herself be led toward the swings. Marcus watched them go. Victoria sat down on a swing and Emma stood behind her, gently pushing. It was clumsy and awkward, and nothing like the polished image Victoria Sterling had spent her life projecting. It was also the most human Marcus had ever seen her look. Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, I'm hungry." Marcus smiled and lifted his son onto his shoulders. "Ice cream?" Ethan considered this seriously. Yes, they walked toward the park exit, leaving Victoria and Emma on the swings behind them. At the edge of the playground, Marcus turned back for one last look. Emma was laughing. It was soft and uncertain, like she had forgotten how and was just remembering. Victoria was laughing too, tears streaming down her face. Two families, two different worlds. Both broken in their own ways. Both learning to heal, not a fairy tale ending, not everything fixed and perfect and tied up with a bow. Just a man who refused to let the world define his worth, and a woman who finally learned the difference between running an empire and building a home. Sometimes healing does not come from the people with the most degrees or the biggest budgets. Sometimes it comes from someone who simply understands what it feels like to love a child the world does not quite know how to reach. And sometimes it takes someone who has been told his whole life that he does not belong in certain rooms, to walk into one of those rooms anyway, sit down on a cold marble floor, and remind a little girl that she is not alone. That is not a small thing, that is everything. In this country, we talk a lot about what people deserve. But we do not always talk honestly about who gets the benefit of the doubt and who has to earn it every single day. Marcus earned nothing he was not already owed. He was simply, finally seen. If this story touched something in you, if you have ever felt invisible or underestimated or judged before you even spoke, know that you are not alone. We share these stories because they matter. Because representation matters. Because seeing someone who looks like you do something that changes lives, that matters. Now I want to hear from you one last time. Leave a comment below and tell me, did this story change the way you think about anything? About how we judge people, about what real help looks like, about racism and the invisible walls that stop people like Marcus from being trusted with the very things they are most qualified to do. And here is today's big question. If Marcus had been a white man in a suit instead of a black man in a catering uniform, do you think he would have been removed from that gala before he ever reached Emma? Drop your answer in the comments. Be honest. I read them all. If this video moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear this story today. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button right now. Every story we share is a reminder that none of us are as alone as we sometimes feel. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the most powerful thing you can offer anyone is simply to see them for who they really are.